Welcome to a little special edition of the ToddCast, specifically for my YouTube subscribers. And so this is what I want to deal with this morning on this Friday morning, which is a question I've already been getting over the last 24 hours, which is simply, what do all these tariffs mean for us politically? So look, here's what we do know at the moment. This does not look like it's going to go very well. You have this kind of economic shock to the system, this kind of, record-breaking falls in the stock market. It's the type of story that everybody pays attention to. This is not the type of stories that it's just people that are invested in the stock market or just wealthy people invested in the stock market. This is a global story. This is arguably the lead story in every major news organization around the world, because these tariffs have impacted everybody. So, look, I think a few things here that we both overestimated with Trump and underestimated with Trump. And it has to do with the idea that he's a transactional guy. And the assumption was, and frankly, this is what many in the business community, because Donald Trump campaigned on this. He said he was going to do this. He has believed in tariffs. It goes back to 1987. Back in 1987, when Roger Stone was trying to help create Donald Trump, the politician, Donald Trump bought a full-page ad in the New York Times. I believe it was the New York Times, may have been the Post, Times, and Journal, actually, but it was definitely a full-page ad that talked about how Japan was ripping off America and that Japan, our trade deficit, and, we had idiot negotiators. If you recall, in 1987, Ronald Reagan was president. So he, in some ways, Donald Trump, who doesn't have much of an ideology, right? He was one time pro-choice and now he's pro-life and all these things. If there's one issue he has been consistent on, is this belief that the American economy should all be sort of within the borders of America. So he does, I think this is one of his actual core beliefs, that this is the way the system should work, that there should be more manufacturing in the country, that if you have that, and he sees everything through this binary way. There's winners and losers, and America's the winner. So therefore, they shouldn't have trade deficits with anybody. People should have trade deficits with America, but it shouldn't be the other way around. So he's somebody that doesn't really, if I were a critic, I'd say he doesn't understand the global economy. But he certainly doesn't, I would say he doesn't really, he doesn't buy into this idea that the global economy has been a success. For the life of me, I don't see how why most people don't understand that if you essentially look from post-World War II to now, America's written the rules for the global economy, and it has benefited America immensely. Still the wealthiest nation. Still, and I say little things. Go to any other country and ask yourself if you'd rather live there or here when it comes to simple things like the mail service or the quality of toilet paper, never mind the availability of goods and services, the availability, the fact that we do have a lot more cheap goods available to us. I grew up in Miami. We had people used to fly in from other countries in order to simply go shopping in the United States. Okay, this has been what the global economy has done for America. So I know it's not cool to be for the status quo these days, right? Everybody wants to disrupt and change, but this is one disruption that doesn't make a lot of sense, because one could argue that since America has essentially decided that the cause of World War II was that we didn't have enough of the economic ties with each other. And the more economic ties you have, the less likely you're going to fight each other. And so guess what? The last time we went through this tariff business, it was followed by World War II. And there's plenty of evidence that it was a pretty direct link. The 1929 stock market crash essentially was the beginning of the collapse of the German economy. Was already fragile. It sort of accelerated the collapse of the German economy, which of course accelerated the rise of Adolf Hitler. And I don't think I need to tell you what happened after he took over Germany. So the point is that the American leadership post-World War II concluded we can't have this type. So what was born, all of these multinational, multilateral organizations, whether it's NATO, the IMF, all of these things. And it has been a success. We went nearly 80 years without a war in Europe, essentially, or almost 80 years. There was the Balkan War. We can't ignore that. And obviously we have the war now with Ukraine. But the fact of the matter is there's been relative peace on Europe, the longest, arguably, period of peace in Europe for 1,000 years, if you want to nitpick on this. So this is a radical change, and it isn't going to get better overnight. So what does this mean politically? It's already pretty clear to me that most elected Republicans, if they could vote without fear of Donald Trump, would take back tariff authority tomorrow. You're already seeing some Senate Republicans. Chuck Grassley has introduced a bill with Maria Cantwell that I think will have majority support. Probably not yet 60 votes, but trust me, it'll get there. But let's talk realistically. How should you watch the next 18 months between now and the midterms? Because if there is a change in control of either house of Congress, the midterms, I do think these tariffs will go away almost immediately. So if let's make this, I believe right now, if there were a Democratic House and a Republican Senate, that they would collectively grab the tariff keys away from Donald Trump. And so the likelihood of a Democratic House and a Republican Senate is pretty high come January of 2027. But between now and then, the question is, would there be a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate to do this with the Republicans in charge of the House? And the answer to that is likely no. There is a big distinction between House Republicans and Senate Republicans. House Republicans are more reliant on the base of Donald Trump's party. They're more reliant on Donald Trump, and they're frankly, their political careers would be dead if Donald Trump decided to kill their careers. I'm not saying Senate Republicans aren't fragile to potential threats from the Donald Trump base, but they're certainly a bit more inoculated, and many of them don't have to run in 26. Not all of them have to be on the ballot in 26. So there's a little bit, in fact, many of them won't be on the ballot ever again with Donald Trump or with Donald Trump as president. So there's a little bit more security that they have in their minds to try to separate themselves from Trump. And frankly, even if you are on the ballot in 26, senators are dealing with a general election electorate. Okay, so a guy like Tom Tillis may be vulnerable to a Trump primary challenge, but the fact of the matter is he only wins re-election if he can figure out how to win the middle. And on this tariff business, which really hurts a state like North Carolina, he's going to have to sit here and walk a line. He doesn't want to antagonize Trump because I think he would struggle in a primary in North Carolina. And at the same time, if somebody to his right beat him in a primary, I don't think that person could win a general election in these midterms in North Carolina. So that's just one example. But the point is, this is what I would watch for over the next sort of 3 to 6 months. I think don't assume that Donald Trump is negotiating with countries. Do I think some countries will get some negotiated reprieve? Yes, I think the UK will. Not much anybody else in Europe. Anybody aligned with the EU, no. But I think the UK, because of Brexit, he will be more inclined to do a deal there. I think he's likely to do a one-on-one deal with Japan because the Japanese have basically been courting him very carefully. They've been obsessed with courting him. Multiple leaders, certainly this ruling party has. And I think he is likely to reward them with some sort of side deal. But for the most part, I think he believes this in his bones. And so I don't think there's going to be a ton of reprieve. So what does that mean? The markets are still going to be volatile. People are not going to be happy. Remember who's watching the stock market the most these days? It's retirees. What's one other thing about retirees that people forget about? They vote, right? The person most likely to vote in a special or election or a midterm election is somebody over the age of 50. They are the most likely voter. So, and right now, they're the ones most sensitive to a loss in value, baby boomers. People in their 30s and 40s, you can even look at this moment. Oh, maybe there's a buying opportunity. You're still invested for the long term, 10 years, 15 years. If you're not touching your retirement, you might have more patience for this. But if you're in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, AKA the people who are the most likely voter and the people the most likely to show up, you're going to be very sensitive to these market disruptions. So I think you're going to likely to see that this is sort of, I think this is going to be what the Afghanistan withdrawal was to Joe Biden, is what this tariff bomb that Donald Trump set off earlier this week is going to be for him. That Afghanistan withdrawal for Joe Biden dropped his approval rating anywhere below 45, somewhere between, sometimes could get as low as 38. He never got above 45 again for the rest of his presidency. At this point, I don't expect Donald Trump to get above 44 or 45 for the rest of his presidency because of this tariff stuff. So this is likely to make him less popular. Doesn't mean he's going to be less popular among the MAGA base. In fact, you see, he's got his propaganda machine going. His media, the supportive folks of his in the media are sort of putting their blinders on and pretending that this is, he's got some brilliant plan here. But it's going to become toxic. You're going to have, I think, a few things to watch for include House Republicans who decide not to seek re-election. Some of them may decide, I'm going to run for governor, I'm going to run for the Senate, but I'm not going to run for the House, because I think a House Republican is going to be a lot more vulnerable in this environment than a Senate Republican. Senate Republican might be able to inoculate themselves some. You've already seen a few of them break away. When you had Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins vote with the Democrats on that, on the Canadian tariffs. So I think you will have some that do that. If you start seeing the Republican retirements get into the double digits, it almost will be handing the Democrats control of the House. And I think that will be something to watch for, because I think look, we already saw in these Monday elections that the Republican base is not that engaged. At least Donald Trump's base is not engaged enough to win these elections. Certainly not in Wisconsin. We saw a place like Escambia County in Florida vote for a Democrat for Congress for the first time since 2006. Has Escambia County supported a Democrat either for Congress, the U.S. Senate, or the presidency? Why is that significant? Well, Escambia County is home to Pensacola, a naval base. It's got probably the largest cohort of federal government workers or federal government adjacent workers in the state of Florida, because of all the adjacent aspects that come with a major naval base like the one in Pensacola. So you already see the vulnerability, and that's just a reaction to all of the cuts that have been taking place due to Doge, and certainly some of the discomfort on that. Now you have this economy that's going to hit people right in the pocketbooks. I mean, the dollar store is going to turn into the $10 store. They're not going to be able to find things that cost $1. That's going to hit a lot of Trump voters. That's going to hit a lot of red districts. So I don't think he's going to back down. I think the thing that what we all thought about Donald Trump, that he was transactional, that the markets would be a guardrail, I think we now need to realize that this third term stuff is such BS. He's more Thelma and Louise here. He's got nothing to lose in his mind. This might be the one thing he has conviction about. And he, I think, has a higher pain tolerance for the market gyrations, a higher pain tolerance for maybe rich people calling him to complain than the average politician. The average politician, Republican or Democrat, has their largest donor on speed dial on their cell phone. So I think members of Congress are going to be hearing, not just from their constituents with angry phone calls into the congressional offices, but the members of Congress themselves are going to hear from their biggest supporters, who are all going to look at their stock portfolios and panic. So it is hard to see how this gets better for Republicans before now and the midterms. And I know we can sit here and say this is a long way to go, but this is something, this severing of ties with so many allies. I got to read you this one quote here from the Canadian Prime Minister, which was just an astonishing quote, but it's It's pretty important. This is the current Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney. And he said the following: the 80-year period when the United States embraced the mantle of global economic leadership, when it forged alliances rooted in trust and mutual respect, and championed the free and open exchange of goods and services, is over. While this is a tragedy, it is also the new reality. And that's why I think Trump had the misconception that somehow America was essentially an essential economy, and that there's just no way that countries wouldn't essentially change their economic behavior to appease the United States. This is providing a huge opening for China. We now have two of our closest Asian economic allies, Japan and South Korea, who are coordinating with the Chinese on how to respond to the U.S. tariffs. We have the Canadians figuring out with the EU how to coordinate. We have now thrown countries that we thought were allies of the United States, into the arms of China, which seems to be an absolute, the unintended consequence that nobody should want, left or right. I mean, if we lose our alliances to our chief economic and frankly cultural rival for global supremacy, what have we done? We're not going to like that. So that's why, I always say to people who don't want America to be the beat cop, I said, okay, if America's not the world's policeman, somebody will be, and you're not going to like any other country being the world's cop. You're going to be a lot happier if we're the world's cop. And we're just ceding this turf. We are giving China an opening all around the world with countries that were so aligned with us, I never thought those bonds would be shaken. So, look, I think this is a Republican Party that's courting disaster. I'm going to quote Rand Paul, who made a very astute point a couple nights ago. Rand Paul, one of the few Republican senators who's been publicly pushing back against these tariffs. This is his sort of core libertarianism in him. A libertarian doesn't want any tariffs on anything. But he pointed out a very important fact. The Republican Party pre-World War II was very similar to the current Republican Party of today. A bit isolationist. It was the party of business. And back then in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, America's businesses were afraid of foreign competition. And so they did want tariffs because it protected their businesses. It protected their wealth. This is not how the economy works anymore. This is the equivalent of Donald Trump trying to somehow manufacture the ice block industry again. The ice block industry used to be a big deal in Europe until we figured out refrigeration and we didn't need blocks of ice to cool our food. And this is the equivalent of trying to turn back the clock to an era that doesn't exist. We put those tariffs in when we weren't using airplanes for cargo then. We were using ships, and certainly in this country, trade. So there's no part of this that makes sense. And trying to look back and say this was some golden age, it wasn't a golden age. We had extreme poverty back in the late 19th century, early 20th century. We had child labor issues. We had terrible work conditions. So I'm not sure what part of that era of business, what part of that era of the economy is actually something to wish we had again. So, this is, and you know what happened after that? The Republican Party wasn't trusted with control of the legislative branch for nearly 60 years. 60 years. They had a brief period where they controlled the House at 2 elections in the 50s, thanks to the popularity of Dwight Eisenhower. But that went away quickly. And they went 40 straight years with control of the House. This all goes back to the Republican Party and their trade issues and being essentially punished for essentially wrecking the economy in the 20s that led to the Great Depression. And many economists have concluded it was the bad tariff regime, among other things, that put us in that situation. So I can't see a positive outlook politically here for the Republicans. And the question is, how many congressional Republicans break for him, and when do they break for him? As I explained earlier, I highly doubt the House Republicans will crack because they got there because of Trump. So in some ways, in for a dime, in for a dollar. The Senate Republicans want to break. Maybe they'll wait till after they pass the tax cut because they're going to need a lot of help from Trump on that. By the way, you want to talk about stupidity with this legislative agenda by this White House. If he knew he always wanted to do this tariff, all these tariffs, he should have waited 6 months, gotten his tax cut, then done this. Instead, he's now I think he's put his tax cuts in jeopardy here, because I think this economy is just going to be in terrible shape come the end of the summer into the fall. We're going to see all sorts of horrible warning signs. You're going to see a rise of unemployment rate. We're already seeing that the parent company of Chrysler and Jeep has already announced tariff-related layoffs. And so the tax cut's going to come. I'm sure Donald Trump's going to try desperately to come up with some sort of rebate check of some sort to try to, and call it like sort of, hey, I'm going to give the first chunk of tariff money that comes into the country, I'm going to give it back to my farmers. I'm going to give it back in it. And it really isn't, all it is our own money that we paid that essentially is covering the tariff costs, then being sent back perhaps in check form. But I'm not sure Congress is going to be comfortable going along with that, because whether it'll even come across as believable. So, but I think he will try something to mitigate this, but I don't think it's going to be getting rid of the tariffs. And even if he gets rid of them, it's not going to solve the larger problem. He's already severed all of these economic and potentially national security ties with so many key allies that putting these partnerships back together is going to take decades. It's going to take decades, and it's going to take, because the concern, this is now twice that America's elected him and this disruptive ideology. So our traditional European partners, our traditional Asian partners, they're not going to quickly get back into bed with us, even if the next term is sort of somebody who is a president who isn't in favor of Trumpism. But it's going to be a long 17 months. So I think people will have to prepare accordingly. I think you will see a pullback in spending, and that will be just, all of that will be a domino effect. But I do expect Congress will finally find its spine and take its tariff power back from the presidency. But it may not happen until you have at least one chamber in Democratic hands. And I think if the Democrats pick up the House, and Republicans, even if it's, Republicans don't lose a single Senate seat, I promise you, there's a large majority that if they know they have the votes in the House to do it, they will take the tariff keys away from the mad king here. And I think that likelihood is quite high, that this is potentially one of the greatest political disasters. I'm trying to look for other equivalents. Maybe this could be as bad as what happened to Democrats in '94 with the assault weapons ban coupled with health care. Perhaps this is as bad as the Tea Party for the Republicans, for the Democrats in 2010. Perhaps it's Watergate, 1974. But I think this is not going to be a small ripple. This is going to be a gigantic crack here. And who knows? Perhaps this leads to a new fight inside the Republican Party. Maybe there are primaries. I'm not there yet. I think as long as Donald is king of his party, you're not going to see successful primary challenges. But I do think if this does lead to what happened the last time the Republicans played with tariff fire, and it leads to huge successes for the Democrats, you will see the Republican Party have a real fight over the direction post-Trump. But for now, prepare for a very tumultuous and likely, Donald Trump's life just got so much harder to politically conduct this presidency. Good luck, everybody.